Australia have an unsettled top three, and with Marnus Labuschagne making 300s in 4 innings to start the Australian domestic season, all hope now lies on that second opening spot to play alongside Usman Khawaja, who himself is not actually making huge runs, but we're going to look through his stats and the stats of all other 10 options for that final opening spot. So nestle in for episode 2 of Ashes Questions. Let's start with Usman Khawaja, because although he seems to be in possession of that opening spot currently, there's a lot of questions arising on how good this man really still is. Well, it's fair to say he's had a pretty stellar career. He's averaged 44 across 6,000 plus test runs, with a high score coming earlier this year. So anyone saying he's getting too old now, he made 232 against Sri Lanka. But there's been many questions throughout Usman's career about how he's so much better when the ball is spinning. Now, there's a few stats to come about his average versus pace, but his stats in Australia are still incredibly strong. He averages 48 in Australia with a high score of 195 not out against South Africa in the start of 2023. But that was his last 100 in Australia. That means it's been almost 3 years now since that last ton in Australia. But his stats opening the batting, which has become a hallmark of Usman Khawaja's comeback to the Australian side. As an opener, he also averages 48 across 80 innings there. So he is as settled as Aussie openers get at the minute. Now, his stats against England are also pretty strong, averaging over 41, and that's characterised by those emphatic 21-22 Ashes series of his back-to-back hundreds when he came back into the Ashes side, into the Australian side, and came back with a vengeance. What a player Usman Khawaja is. But let's just quickly move forward to where the stats have maybe dropped since the 2023 Ashes, where he made 141 in the first test. It's not been brilliant since then. He's had a high score of 57 in the last 9 tests, and since that 2023 Ashes Test series, he's played 22 test matches and scored just 100, which is his 232 in Sri Lanka. And more importantly, his average against pace is a little bit worrying. He averages in the last 11 tests under 20 against the Pacers, and the next worst Australian batter to have played as many or similar amounts of innings is Marnus Labuschagne, who's got an average of 23 against pace. And then he's played 3 test matches in the West Indies earlier this year, alongside that World Test Championship final defeat to South Africa. And since then, he's made 123 runs in 8 innings at an average of 15, and go even further back to the Border Gavaskar Trophy last Australian summer, where Australia played India. Usman Khawaja made scores of 8, 4, 13, 9 not out, 21 and 8 to start the series. So despite getting 69 on his comeback in the Sheffield Shield earlier last week, for Queensland, the main question remains on his age. He's 38, turning 39 in December. So can he still go for it? I think so. His scare factor for an English point of view is 7. The next man, also technically in possession of that opening spot after opening there in the West Indies, it's Sam Konstas. Now, it was a career that started brightly for the now just turned 20-year-old. He got 60 off 65 on debut against India, scooping the likes of Jasprit Bumrah. We've all heard the story. His sensational start to an Australian career hasn't quite continued though. He then made a couple of 20s to finish off that series, but he then got dropped for the Australia versus Sri Lanka series. And I think dropped is a little bit unfair, just because Travis Head seems to be a bit of an opener for Australia in subcontinental conditions. So he came in for Sam Konstas, but he returned after the World Test Championship final, and he played 3 tests against the West Indies. Now, those 3 tests didn't go too well for him. He scored just 50 runs across those 3 tests, averaging 8.3 in 6 innings. It was a tough series for the young lad. High score of 25 as well. However, he has since been playing for Australia A, and to be fair to him, he got some runs in Lucknow in India against India A. Sam Konstas opened the batting and scored 122 ball 100 in the first session, which was pretty astronomical until everyone realised that it was in fact the road of all roads. Everyone could bat on that surface, and it turns out that across 4 days there were 13 wickets in the whole game, which saw Australia score 532 for 6 declared, India A 531 for 7 declared, and then I think Australia A made 56 for none. So fair to say, absolute road that Sammy Konstas made that ton on. Nonetheless, he's got to do it, doesn't he? Someone's got to do it. And those conditions are got to be very, very different to the conditions we're going to see out in Australia, which seem to be favouring pace every single year more and more and more. But finally, it's worth making a point on Sam Konstas just to say that as the Aussie selectors look to the return of the Sheffield Shield and Australia's first-class competition to see how the opening batters do, Sam Konstas started last week with scores of 4 off 25 and 14 off 15 against Western Australia. I don't think England will be too scared of him. His scare factor is 4. Option number 3, one of my personal favourites. It is Mitchell Marsh. And this guy is absolutely bopping it at the minute for Australia in white ball cricket, opening up for them. And he's also the captain in the white ball stuff. Let's have a little look at what he said, though, in response to when journos asked him, your thoughts on the Ashes, Mitchell Marsh, all he replied was, haha, no. But he then went on to get 100, and I'll tell you more about his stats right now. Last 7 international innings, opening the batting for Australia in white ball cricket, ODI and T20. As captain, he made 54, 88, 18, 100, 85, 9 not out, and 103 not out. And that 103 not out came against New Zealand. And in that game, he scored more than double the rest of the Australian team combined. That 103 not out looked like he was playing on a completely different surface. All right? The rest of the team couldn't even score half of what he got. The second highest score was 14 in that Australia innings, and Mitch Marsh got 103 not out. George Bailey, one of the Australian selectors, has spoken so fondly of Mitchell Marsh's return to red ball cricket, saying that he can rip games open, which would be incredibly important in this Ashes series, because it's fair to say England have got a few of those players as well. In the 3 tests in 2023 that he played in the Ashes against England in England, Mitchell Marsh was a thorn in the Australian side. 250 runs at 50, including a blistering runner ball 118 that came against England, of course, but in particular against a firing Mark Wood, who went on to take 5 in the innings. He was bowling absolutely rapid, but Mitchell Marsh was pulling him into next week over deep backward square leg for a huge 6. So he's been opening recently in the white ball stuff. Let's look at his averages. In T20, he averages over 40 opening the batting. In T20, averaging over 40 is ridiculous. And that's just as an opener in international cricket. Now, opening in ODI cricket, it's even better. He averages over 51 as an opener in ODI cricket. But the main negative for Mitch Marsh is no one quite runs as hot and cold as he does. And in particular, it was those 4 tests that he played against India in the Border Gavaskar Trophy. He performed well in the Ashes in 2023, so Australia picked him for that series against India. And he made scores of 9, 6, 6, 47, 9, 5, 2, 4 and 0 before he got dropped for the inbound consistent Bo Webster. So after all that, as an England fan, it's fair to say I'll be pretty petrified if Mitch Marsh was to open the batting. He's got a scare factor of 8. Now moving on to those who, fair to say, Australians think have had their chance in Test cricket for Australia. So let's go to Marcus Harris first. He's notched up over 1,000 runs for Lancashire in the county championship at an average of over 60 this English summer. And he's also added to that in Sheffield Shield last year. He's almost scored 2,000 first-class runs in the last calendar year. 1,800 at an average of 45. All right, but fair to say he's not been opening much. He's been batting at 4 a lot for Lancashire, and he's also been batting at 3 a fair amount as well. Let's look at his Test career. Very similar to the man who's next in our options list, but he scored 607 runs at an average of 25, high score 79 against India, and he also scored a 76 against England. However, he played 3 tests against them in England in 2019, and he didn't do very well. Averaged just 19, scoring 58 runs. So, fair to say, he's not been amazing against England. He did score that 76 in the last Ashes series where he came in to the Australian side. But in recent games, he scored a duck in his first List A return game in Australia last week. That was then followed by 38 in that competition. But he scored 61 and then 13 in the first game of the Sheffield Shield, round 1. So he's in good form, but can I see Australian picking him? I'm not really sure. His scare factor is just 3. Matt Renshaw is up next. Now, see, I like Matt Renshaw. I really do. 624 runs, though, in the last calendar year at an average of 35. That's a third of what Marcus Harris has got. But he has been picked to replace Marnus Labuschagne in the ODI squad for their series against India coming up very soon. Renshaw in for Labuschagne. Very interesting pick. He was averaging over 50 last year in the List A competition, in the Australia domestic competition, that is. So he's had some terrific form in the 50 over stuff. But if you look at his test career, 645 runs at an average of 29, 5 better than Marcus Harris in the same number of games. His high score coming in 2017, which was 184 against Pakistan. So he's shown he can go big for Australia. But his last test series was in India in 2023, where he made 3 scores of 0, 2 and 2. I think it was a golden duck on his return. 3 games for Australia A, though, over the Australian winter against Sri Lanka A, where he scored 80, 106 and 62 in 3 50 over games. So he's clearly in Australia's plans for the 50 over stuff, but in the longer format, I'm not really sure. He played 1 game, though, in the Sheffield Shield so far this year, just like all the other Australian options. And you'll be surprised to hear, playing for Queensland, batting with both Marnus Labuschagne and Usman Khawaja on his way to 128. He's in the ODI plans. Could he be in the Test plans? I'm not sure. His scare factor is a little bit higher than Marcus Harris. For England, scare factor of 4. Cameron Bancroft's next up. We all know what's happened to him across his career, but let's look a little bit more recently. In the last calendar year, 1,172 runs at an average of 33. But of all the options today, other than Mitch Marsh, he is the lowest run scorer in last year's Sheffield Shield. So, a few questions arising there. His test stats, a few less than the last 2, 446 runs at an average of 26. His high score, 82 not out, coming in the 17-18 Ashes in the first test in that fourth I think, innings. But in the rest of that series, 2017-18, other than that 82 not out, in the rest of the series, he played all 4 other tests, and he only made 97 runs in those following test matches. Okay, in the final 7 innings. So that's not ideal for Cameron Bancroft. He then made his return after the ban in 2019 for the Ashes in that hostile environment. All right, and he scored 44 runs at 11. He only played 2 tests there before getting the drop. So that'll be his first test. If he comes back for this Ashes, it'll be his first test since then. But this Australian season, he's done all right. List A competition, the 50 over stuff, domestically, he's got scores of 63 and 48. But in that first round of the Sheffield Shield, all he could muster up was 10 off 29 and 3 off 18. Cameron Bancroft's scare factor is 2. Next up is Nathan McSweeney, a man who played 3 tests against India in that Border Gavaskar Trophy and scored 72 runs at an average of 14. High score coming of 39 of 109. And fair to say, Bumrah did have his number, and so did a few other of the Indian bowlers. But his first class year since September 2024, 988 runs in first-class cricket, averaging 39, and that included 478 Shield runs at 43 in the last Sheffield Shield. But fair to say the selectors absolutely love this lad. He's in favour with the selectors, especially at Australia A. He played 7 games for them, 5 50 over games against Sri Lanka A, and then 2 against India A. And fair to say, he did okay against Sri Lanka A. He made scores of 85 not out and 94. And then in that game against India A, where Sam Konstas took runs and so did everyone else, he made 74 and 85 not out on that absolute motorway. He's been skippering for Australia A in a fair few of those games, but on his Sheffield Shield return last week, it was a shaky start. A 21 ball duck, followed by a 23 ball 6. That is a seriously ropey start for South Australia there for Nathan McSweeney. But could we see him potentially getting in that squad? I think so, but maybe not as the frontline batter. I could see him getting picked in the squad, but then not playing those first few tests, maybe as a backup batter. But I think he's got to get some runs, it's fair to say, in the start of this Australian summer. His scare factor will be 4. Next up, it's Curtis Patterson. Now, this guy's one of my personal favourites because I just think he's so unlucky. Probably one of the unluckiest cricketers I've ever heard of, really. Listen to some of this. The 32-year-old, okay, we're going to go for a slightly different order of stats. We're going to start with his test career, okay. He's only batted twice for Australia in 2 tests. And in the second one of those 2 batting times, he got 114 not out. Then he didn't play again. He's never played again for Australia since that 114 not out. And unfortunately, it's a similar story in first-class cricket. He became the youngest man ever to score 100 on first-class debut in the Sheffield Shield. He made 157 at 18 years old. But guess what? He didn't play another game for another 2 years in first-class cricket. And then it seriously started to take off because, listen to this, in the last calendar year, he has 1,146 runs at an average of 55. He was 4th in the Sheffield Shield top run scorers last summer in Australia with 750 runs at 57 in just 8 games. This year, he's played 2 games for Australia A against Sri Lanka A, making 59. And he started the Australian summer opening the batting in List A cricket with scores of 110, 73 and 66 in his first 3 games in List A cricket as an opener. But he batted at 3 in the first Sheffield Shield game, making scores of just 8 and 4. I can't see him getting picked, but if he does, I think England will be pretty scared of him because of how good this man can be. His scare factor is 5. Now we're on to the 3 debutantes, the final 3 options to partner alongside Usman Khawaja. Henry Hunt, we're going to start with. 10th in the Shield runs last year in 2024-25. He scored 682 runs at an average of just 31. However, he's not in favour among Australian selectors. He wasn't picked at all to play for Australia A in those 7 games in Sri Lanka and India. But he started his year very, very well. He played in the Sheffield Shield the first round, playing against the likes, or facing up to, Scott Boland and Fergus O'Neill. Fergus O'Neill being incredibly prolific in the English summer for Nottinghamshire as their out-and-out front line seamer. But against those two, against Victoria, Henry Hunt made a first innings 126 off 307 balls. Fair to say, he's taken his start to the year by the horns. Fair play to Henry Hunt. But could we see him playing for Australia without playing for Australia A? I think it's unlikely. His scare factor is 2. Now, the second debutant, a name that's been flying around a little bit, and it's not someone I've really heard much of, Campbell Kellaway, the 22-year-old. He's played already a heap of first-class games, and he scored 912 at 38 in last calendar year, and he was 6th in the Sheffield Shield run scorers when he was 21 in last summer's Australian summer's competition. He also played 4 innings for Australia A over that Australia winter against India A, scoring 88 and 24 not out in that high run scoring fest that was in Lucknow, where Konstas got his 100, but he also got 9 and 0 in the next game he played. So it's been a slow start to the Australian season for him, making scores of 0 and 40 in that first Sheffield Shield game for Campbell Kellaway. But he's definitely in the eyes of the selectors moving forward. His scare factor is 1. And now we're on to the final option. I might have, left the best option till last. Who knows? It's Jake Weatherall, the man who plays for Adelaide Strikers in the Big Bash and Tasmania in first class domestic stuff. Listen to these stats. In the last calendar year, 1,267 runs at an average of 58. Top Sheffield Shield run scorer last summer, scoring 906 runs at 50. And in his return to the Sheffield Shield this year, he made 250s in 2 innings. 57 and 67 in those 2 knocks against Queensland. And in addition to this, for Australia A against Sri Lanka A in Australia earlier in the year, he made 183. That was alongside Jason Sanger's 200 not out. So fair to say it might have been pretty decent batting conditions. But nonetheless, Jake Weatherall made 183 for Australia A. But you get the sense for him to be in real contention. If he can get 100 for Tasmania at the start of this Sheffield Shield season, there's 3 games to go until the Ashes. Maybe you think he could make it happen. We've seen this guy tear up for Adelaide Strikers for the Big Bash. He can turn the game by himself. So, England could be pretty scared of this bloke. His scare factor is 6. Finally, my decision. I'm going to give you 2 opening pairs. One that I think Australia will pick, and 2 that I think Australia probably should pick, or I want them to pick. Not as an England fan, but if I was Australian. All right, so first up, the Australian pair I think Australia are going to pick is boring. The 2 men in possession, Sam Konstas and Usman Khawaja. Experience and youth. Yes, Konstas had a tricky series in West Indies, but on the whole, it was a pretty low-scoring series. Konstas made 100 for Australia A, and I just get the feeling that if he can pick up a few runs in the Sheffield Shield, he'll be the man that Australia pick. I don't think they should pick him, though, to be fair, because I don't think England would be too scared of him. I reckon they'd make light work, to be honest. But the Australian opening pair that I think they should pick is between 2 men. Yes, I think they should pick Usman Khawaja. I think it'll be his last series. But the other 2, I think personally, should be between Mitch Marsh and Jake Weatherall. Now, Jake Weatherall, we've heard his stats. He's 30 years old. He could make something happen for Australia. I really think he could. He's been so prolific for Tasmania over the last few years. But Australia's white ball opener, Mitchell Marsh, a little bit of a David Warner arc, white ball opening into test match opening. I think that England would be petrified of Mitchell Marsh. So if Australia pick any of those 2, I think they will be in very happy hands at the top of the order. My final decision, though, I think they should go Usman Khawaja and Mitchell Marsh, because that 11 could be absolutely nasty, starting with those 2 cricketers. So make sure to comment your next Ashes question below, what you want me to answer next. It's been a pleasure. See you all next time on Ashes Questions.